Welcome back. This is Business. My name is Simba Elijah Charles Kiage. Thank you very much for being part and parcel of our show this morning. We are straight on to our economic review where we table for you some of the biggest headlines that you're supposed to wake up to this morning. Let's now for attack it this morning. Education says that the decision on school reopening is under review. Now, Education Cabinet Secretary Professor George Magoha has said the government is reviewing its decision on the reopening of schools in the wake of the prevailing decline in the number of new COVID-19 cases. CS Magoha has said the Ministry of Education will activate small stakeholder meetings to discuss the way forward and upon consensus table the proposals to the entire ministry's stakeholders on the plea for payment of teachers to be hired by the boards of management and non-teaching staff in public schools. CS Magoha has reassured that payments to the two cadres were approved 6 weeks ago and will be disbursed sooner. Now, the plan involves the following. All right, October to December, candidates to cover the second term. January to March, candidates to cover third term. April 15th, 2 KCPE examinations will be administered. April 6th to 30th, KCSE examinations will be administered. Now, the Education Response Committee will consider proposals on September 21st before the final approval of the plans from the National COVID Response Committee on September 25th. Joining us this morning to help us understand this headline and answer the question, are we ready to reopen the schools even before we dig deeper into why we're not ready? We are joined by Peter Amanga and also Jasper Undema this morning. Gentlemen, happy to have you around. And I want to start with Peter Amanga, who's in the studio. I want to ask you, Peter, this question. Are we ready? Are we not ready?
Of course we are not ready. We have not been ready for anything. That is the truth of the matter.
Yeah.
In this country, we are like ambulance chasers. We keep running and having crisis by management by crisis. So the education system is not ready. The schools are not ready. Our people are not ready. So what we can say is that as for now, the infrastructure is not ready. Teachers are not there. Schools have not received funding from government. So things are not ready, and we are just saying that let's not open schools.
Let's not open schools. I just want to leave it there and cross over to Jasper this morning. Jasper, if you could unmute your mic so that we can actually get talking about this morning. So the question is, I saw you smile when Peter Munga said, we are not ready, we've never been ready. Do you share the same sentiment?
To some extent, Simba, first, thank you for having me on the show. To some extent, I agree with what Munga is saying, that as a country, as far as matters of education are concerned, we are not ready for reopening. Remember, after we closed schools, which was a good step that was taken by government because we didn't know how to handle this pandemic. There was limited information about it. So everybody felt that closing school was the right thing to do. Unfortunately, after schools were closed, there is no a kind of approach that has been taken to ensure that kids return to school safely. Because right now, we could be having the ministry ensuring that the schools are ready for reopening. You remember there are quite a number of schools that were used as isolation centers. Those schools, we don't have information right now if they have been fumigated. The schools have not acquired thermal guns. The schools have not acquired masks. The issue about social distancing. I saw the ministry proposing or going ahead to procure desks for the learners. And then you ask yourself, where are these desks going to be put? So fundamentally, Simba, there is really something wrong with our education system. And I thought Professor Magoha was coming on board to help straighten some of the policy issues in the ministry. But it is quite sad that there is nothing that is forthcoming from the ministry. You've seen that the minister visit various schools to see preparedness. These schools have not been given enough funds. And even after going to school, what are kids going to learn? Which curriculum are they going to learn? So there are a lot of aspects which are not in order, and the ministry has not endeavored to ensure that the schools are ready for reopening. Of course, reopening is the best thing to do right now because according to UNICEF and WHO, the kids are having a rough time being at home. You remember that some children depended on the feeding program, so the feeding program is not there in school, and therefore those kids are suffering. So as education experts, we argue that the CS has failed the ministry and really there's nothing good to smile about.
Fantastic. Munga, let's therefore talk about this plan. And I want to, yes, we're talking about the reopening of the schools, but the plan that is on the table is to have candidates back to school as immediately as October. Now, let's look at it therefore. Now, October to December. Now, remember, that's no holiday now for candidates. They're supposed to cover the second term. Fantastic. January to March, candidates to cover third term. Then come April, remember that's no break at all, all right? Come April, then they'll go in for exams. KCPE will be administered on the 14th to 17th. April 6th to 30th, KCSE examinations shall be administered. Looks like a good plan because we're not talking about everybody going back to school, we're just talking about candidates. Yes.
Of course, that's another again one of those things that we say they're myopic because yes, first of all, exams is not everything. We need to realize as a country that many countries have moved away from making the exam issue to be the one that guides an education system. And that's what the new curriculum that we are receiving, we thought it was all about. That we would have now tried this year. In fact, if I was to advise, this is one of those years we would have just done away with some of these exams. Like the KCPE exam, the one for Standard 8. It's meaningless because at the end of the day, all children who do that exam transit to Form 1. So why should you again subject them to an exam in April? Why waste all that money? Why even do it? Why don't we just say, okay, whatever you covered up to Standard 8 first term, well, you can proceed now to the next class. It will work because after all, we have something we call 100% transition from Standard 8 to Form 1. So why is this exam? Why should we waste so much time when we have had this crisis of COVID-19? Think about an exam. Now, the other thing again is this. We look at the candidates. Many of our children, we've heard about the teenage pregnancies, we heard about many, actually let me say this, most of our learners, especially in high school and Standard 8 and above, Standard 6, 7 and above, they even forgot those things about books. The ones in public schools, most of them have gone to hustles. Others are taking care of their parents' cows and herds of cattle. Others are married. We don't need to hide these things. Some of our kids we are teaching are parents. Are we going to open schools for Parents Association to come in, or are they going to be learners to come in schools? We need first of all to address simple things like, are our students still safe? Are these exams important? Are they important after such a pandemic that we have had? Especially the one for Standard 8. And all these proposals they're making, when you look at them, we know Magoha very well. He has made many other proposals. He talked about all the schools open in September. He has now talked about January. He has changed now to October. He may change again to 2030. So all we are trying to say is, he's not a person we can rely on. Parents are confused. We as teachers are confused. The ministry is more confused than all of us. We can't depend on this. We have appealed, me personally in my blogs and my tweets have appealed to the president that you don't have a good minister in the Ministry of Education. He's a professor of medicine. Kindly, Mr. President, you can get him some other ministry where he can go. For now, we need a person who can lead us step by step, carry us along. This education is about timelines. Education is about setting goals. Our minister has failed to do that for us. And exams is not life and death. We can have an education system without exams, especially considering what we have gone through.
Pretty much. All right, Jasper, I want to bring you in on that as well, because there's also the other plan to have schools run without a full population, even as we are talking about the candidates going back to class. Talk to me. What is going to make that possible? And from what you said in this morning, do you think it's possible with the populations that we have in our schools right now to have an interchange program where you're having half of the population in school, and then when they're done learning, the other half can join in? Because that's one of the proposals that are going to be looked at on as of 21st September with some of the stakeholders in the Ministry of Education.
Simba, that is a very difficult mode to implement here in Kenya, considering that look at a county like Mombasa, where there could be like 2 national schools in Mombasa, and we have children from Kiambu who are studying in Mombasa. So how are those kids going to commute all the way to Mombasa, maybe from Monday to Wednesday, and then come and then go back the other week? So it is indeed a very difficult kind of mode that cannot effectively work in Kenya. It will bear a lot of challenges. Among us raised the issue about the cabinet secretary, and indeed, if you've been seeing him holding press conferences, you know, right now parents are very anxious. They want to hear hope from the CS. They want to hear logical, cogent information from the CS. And what does the CS do? The CS is on the press conferences, is chest thumping, is arrogant. He does not address the issues that have been raised. I saw him holding a press conference, it was on Monday, and the CS could not even take questions from the journalists. So there is lack of leadership in the ministry, which has also been occasioned by the CS, and to a large extent, because you say the buck stops with the president. President Edgar Lungu of Zambia has already opened the schools. President Magufuli has a position on opening schools. President Trump of the US has been pushing the governors to open schools. But here in Kenya, you've never had the president speak on education in this particular country. That is why Professor Magoha is not really content as far as this information is concerned. And therefore, that is why some of us feel that it is time that you had another cabinet secretary in the Ministry of Education, because it has been proven over the years that reforms in the Ministry of Education depend with an individual. We had CS Matiang'i in the Ministry of Education, and most parents were impressed with what the CS was doing. The Ministry of Education does not have institutionalized reforms, institutionalized progressive policies. It has been depending on an individual. So if we have Professor Magoha as the CS for education and is not pushing for the right things, for example, construction of more schools, provision of necessary tools to the schools before schools reopen, then there is a problem. And I think it is a time that the president called the CS to order, called the CS to account, so that as a country we can be ready for reopening. Kenya is a huge country. Kenya is a developed country in the East African community where we need to offer leadership even in the field of education. So if you have a CS who does not really know, who has lost touch with what the common mwananchi feels, then there is a problem. We are in trouble. And I'll not be surprised after 21st, the meeting that is going to be held, I think, on 21st, I will have no doubt that the CS might actually say that the schools again will be reopened after this particular committee has told us when to reopen. So he is a person who is very indecisive, and it is high time that the president did the right thing to ensure that there is good leadership in the ministry.
Fantastic. Just so that I don't seem like I'm siding with you, gentlemen, I just want to get the idea this morning on this issue. Yeah, Amanga, speak to me from the private schools perspective. Yeah. I mean, yes, we do know what the effect has been. I mean, they are willing now because the whole value chain in the survival of the private schools has now been affected in the country. Yeah. So speak to me from that perspective. Don't you think that the general feeling now, more than ever therefore, is that the schools need to be reopened sooner rather than later?
That's very true. Actually, even personally as an educationist, I would rather schools be opened. You see, the opening is what everybody wants. We are even saying, look at the big economies which have had serious effects of COVID-19. Numerous deaths in thousands, like the UK. They have reopened their schools. You see, Australia has reopened their schools. Big economies have now opened their schools. So as Kenyans, we actually want our schools open. Private schools actually contribute a lot to the education system in this country.
Yes.
So when they are going down, and it's not only private schools, even public schools, their infrastructure is decaying. The BIM teachers have not been paid. The private school teachers are not being paid properly the way they used to be paid. And all this is bad for our future, for our education system in future, and for the new curriculum that we are trying to implement. Schools should be opened, but the question remains, is it the sake of just opening schools for opening? Why did we close them in the first place? Why? There must be a reason that we close schools, and that reason should guide us to know that before we open, we should have tackled some of the issues that made us to close our schools. This country and the education ministry has done nothing apart from giving press conferences, and apart from Magoha moving around with a tape measure like a plumber and measuring the social distances between a desk and another desk. There is nothing you can say the ministry has done so far. So we want schools open, but parents and teachers and stakeholders are saying, yes, open the schools, but why are you not releasing money? Why are you not paying? Even the president said, give even private schools some money. Nothing has gone to those private schools. You know, the laptops, we talked about going online with our education system, KICD, whatever, all those things seem to be collapsing. We are saying, fine, open schools. But can't you also, for this time, once, get it right? Add some classrooms, release money on time, add us more teachers, and then make sure there's proper sanitation. There are good sanitation facilities in schools. Then you can open the schools.
Yes. Just to pick your sentiments on that as well, talk to me from a private school perspective. A parent already paid their school fee in an expensive private school, and they're sort of thinking what's going to happen to it because of the ecosystem there is not going on. But also talk to me from the perspective of clearing the candidates of school first, and then we figure the rest of them come next year. Do you think that therefore that would sort of complicate situations right now that even the CS himself will find very difficult to handle?
Thank you. Your question has two angles. Number one, you're asking about the private schools. The private schools have been hit hard by this particular pandemic. You've seen on television that most schools have either been auctioned, some of them have been turned into rentals, others have been turned into shops. And therefore, coming next year or when the schools reopen, there are not going to be these particular private schools. I have a friend of mine who has a school in Utawala, and the landlord was on his neck, and the guy had no option but to close school and sell out all the assets. And therefore, most private schools have closed, and therefore, we are going to see a surge in population of public schools. Then the second aspect you raised about allowing the candidates to go back to school, then other forms can join later. That is the best decision to do as per now, because there is the issue about social distancing, and most of these schools are highly populated, and therefore allowing the candidate classes to resume will be able to help us in terms of ensuring there is social distancing. But also the ministry needs to tell the parents, as much as we are focusing on the candidate classes, Form 4 and Class 8, what about these other classes? The parents need to know so that they can be able to plan. It will be unfortunate if the CS will say that schools are going to be opened on October. That will be a big blow to the parents. We know that most parents have lost their jobs, others are on pay cut, and therefore ambushing the parents by telling them that the schools are going to open in 2 weeks' time, that is going to be catastrophic. And that is why we are saying that the ministry needs to be cognizant of the needs of Kenyans, of the real life of Kenyans right now. And therefore, that is why we are calling upon the ministry to have an omnibus approach, a robust approach on various issues as far as resuming the school calendar is concerned.
Pretty much, Peter Amunga and
Yeah.
Jasper Ondemu, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We take a little break, but gentlemen, I will call you back again on 21st of September because we expect that they're going to look into that, and then we talk about, as we wait therefore for the final stakeholder meeting that is on the COVID-19 National Response Committee that's going to look into that issue on September 25th. But once we come back though, let's talk about beer issues in this country. They've been hit by the pandemic, but it looks again as if they are now getting exposed to increased tax. What is that going to do to their businesses? And is it timely for the government to do that, knowing very well what the effect of the pandemic has been to the members of the hotels, restaurants, and bar owners in this country? Once we come back here on Business Hour.